Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to Recite Live Lectures. Dear friends, as you know that we started a series on philosophy of mind, and today we are conducting yet another lecture in the same series. In today's lecture, we will be continuing with the problem of qualia. It will be part 2 and concluding part of problem of qualia. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thanks, Amrit. So, hello friends, as you're already aware, we have been discussing different issues regarding philosophy of mind in this series, and we have been broadly discussing different issues, different problems, different from different perspectives within philosophy of mind. And under that, in our last lecture, we considered yet another problem, which kind of more or less remains kind of sort of a perennial issue so far in philosophy of mind, which is the nature of qualia. And now, in our last lecture, we have already discussed what exactly do we mean by qualia. It's a plural for another term, namely quale, which refers to the subjective experience of certain things. So, if, say for example, redness of red and blueness of blue, painfulness of pain, and so on and so forth. So the basic problem here, as we have already discussed part of it in our earlier lecture, is that since, especially in Western philosophy, the accounts of mind, accounts of different kind of explanations of mind are mostly from the point of view of physicalism or materialism. Therefore, qualia, which is qualitatively very different from any kind of physical qualities or any kind of physical description of things, seems to always defy any explanation, any sort of a complete account, any sort of complete description of itself. So the problem here is that the problem of qualia, or problem of subjective experience, the things as as they are experienced by us from the first person perspective, that remains a kind of something that seems to sort of remain unexplained in philosophy of mind till today. And each time a new kind of a theory is proposed regarding how the nature of mental states could be explained, some new arguments keep coming from the other side, who from certain other set of philosophers, who always point out that this problem, namely problem of qualia, is a hard nut to crack within philosophy of mind. And this is the reason why Chalmers would call it a hard problem. So, for according to him, several other problems could be solved, could be answered in much more convincing way regarding mind, and so on and so forth. But the problem of qualia, which is why certain kind of neurophysical responses should result in some kind of subjective experience, which is available only to the person concerned, only to the person in question. Only to the person who's actually having those experiences. Why something like that should happen, and how to account for it, that is also considered a hard problem. Apart from that, we saw in our last lecture that one of the important arguments that has been presented, from against any sort of physicalism, and in favor of qualia, is Thomas Nagel's paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? And there we saw that Thomas Nagel, approaches this issue mainly from kind of a metaphysical and epistemological point of view. So his argument basically, is sort of what is it what is it for a bat to know, certain things about the world. So problem is more metaphysics oriented, as we have already seen. The basic question that he's asking is, would it ever be possible for us to really understand the bat's point of view, to understand what is it like for a bat to be bat? So now the important thing that we need to underscore here is, what is it for a bat to be bat? Now, any approach to this answer that we may take would involve our perspective. So this sort of any question like this would require taking the bat's point of view. But a problem here is that we cannot lose our perspective, one. And we cannot have bat's perspective, that's two. So these are the two problems. I mean, we don't know what is it like for a pain to be apart from my feeling of the pain. So if there could be an account of it, if there could be some kind of a convincing account that I could have for that, then probably we would have made a way through out of this problem. But the problem is that I cannot lose my perspective towards my experience. And another concomitant issue is nobody can have my perspective, or conversely, I cannot assume anybody else's perspective towards their subjective experiences. So this is what is suggested in the thought experiment proposed by Thomas Nagel in his very famous paper, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? So there, but he approaches this problem from the point of view of metaphysics, because we don't really know what is it to have actually the perspective of a bat. When I try to solve this problem, all I can do is I can imagine myself as a bat. Or even if I'm performing, I'm trying to do some kind of a physical examination of bat's physiology, that will be my perspective towards bat's physiology. And again, there also to get a vantage point somewhere, from where I would be able to see what exactly is going on inside the bat's mind, that doesn't look possible at all. Some kind of a camera to be fitted in some part of the brain, which immediately projects onto the screen what's going on, on so to speak, sort of a two-dimensional screen, that we seem to always have. So in the sense that we generally like kind of field of vision that we have before us is generally two-dimensional. So exactly the same kind of visual experience cannot be captured through any kind of physiological examination. So that being the case, metaphysically it seems impossible for us to understand what is it like to be a bat. And from the point of view of epistemology, the question is, what is knowing from the bat's point of view? Could there be knowledge of qualia from another point of view, as it actually happens? So a point here is that Thomas Nagel, through his proposed thought experiment, namely what is it like to be a bat, tries to propose that it seems almost impossible to have a third person account of subjective experience of somebody, for that matter some animal. So there could be no objective account of certain sort of phenomenal realities, phenomenal properties, some kind of subjective experiences that somebody might be having. But at the same time, as we learned in our last lecture, the point is that none of these philosophers who sort of present arguments in favor of qualia, most of them are not skeptical about the possibility of physicalism or materialism. We would to also try to understand what's the difference between physicalism and materialism. Should we always consider it synonymously? So the another thing we should notice here is that most the philosophers, including Thomas Nagel and for that matter even Frank Jackson, they are not suggesting that we should stop inquiring from the point of view of materialism or physicalism. So in the same line, what Thomas Nagel is suggesting at the end of his argument is that there requires to be some kind of paradigmatic shift, because the way our sort of our scientific methodology and the limitations of scientific methodology today, scientific method today, do not seem to provide any breakthrough. I mean, there seem to be some kind of insufficiency, from the point of view of scientific method so far. So unless there is some kind of a path-breaking paradigmatic shift within scientific method, it seems almost impossible for us to understand how we could ever know how things seem to be, how things are experienced by a bat. So, and which is different from two people arguing about how a bat sort of what kind of experiences or what kind of account to offer of a particular thing, because there could always be a consensus, because if there are two people arguing about, say for example, for that matter, even what is it like to be a bat, so the issue here there would be that both these people are theorizing about what is it like to be a bat from their own perspectives. Neither of them has a direct perspective from the point of view of the bat, and from the point of view of how they are theorizing about this particular question in hand, there could be some kind of consensus between these two thinkers. But that is very, very different from actually having a direct answer to what is it like to be a bat. That's a different kind of question. So which requires not forming a theoretical kind of a consensus among community of inquirers, but it requires an answer which comes with an evidence, direct evidence at that, from the point of view of the experiences being had by a particular person. So the issue here is how to get that perspective and how to get a picture of things, experiential picture of things from that perspective. And we don't even know, we have no clue about how we could sort of ever have a glimpse of that picture, given the limitations of our scientific instruments, in general, and scientific method, by and large. So this is how the problem is tackled by Thomas Nagel. Now there is yet another argument which seems to favor qualia, and which goes right into the face of some of the other physicalist account, whether reductionist accounts like behaviorism or functionalism, or eliminativist account like eliminative physicalism. Many of these arguments are basically directed against either of one of these takes on the issue. And one such argument is Mary's room argument, which we have already discussed, in a different context. But to remind ourselves of what exactly is Mary's room argument. The argument is that we in this thought experiment we are asked to imagine a girl named Mary, who for some reason has always been confined to a room which only has things either black or white. So she sees basically, one of the limitations that she is living with is that she sees things only as black or white, different gradations of black and white. So now, but an important another condition here is that not only does she live in an environment which never brings her face to face with any colorful things. So she has never had an experience of colorful things, so to speak. She has never seen any colorful things. But at the same time, another condition that's there is that Mary has been has a keen interest in knowing how we are able to see things. So she takes a lot of interest, in studying about how does, the seeing of things or experiencing the seeing of things becomes possible for us. So she has a complete, account of what does it mean for somebody. Now, what we should underscore is the word somebody. She knows what is it for somebody to undergo an experience of, say, for example, red. What is it for somebody to see red, or what is it for somebody to, see something as green in color, or to see something as blue in color. So she has read all the possible accounts of it, and we'll have to also assume here that this the account that she has, the explanation that she has of what is it what does it mean to see a particular color. That's a kind of a complete explanation. It's a kind of a complete scientific account of what it means for somebody to undergo a certain kind of phenomenal experiences. Now, further on, what Frank Jackson wants us to imagine is that one fine day, Mary, is able to go out of the room. She's able to walk out of the room, and is able to see this colorful world. So she is able to see the green of leaves on the tree. She is able to see the blue of the sky, and countless colors that we find within nature. Now, the problem here is that she already has, by definition, a complete explanation, a complete account, a complete scientific account of what it means for somebody to see a particular color or to see something as colorful, and so on and so forth. Now, so the big question that Frank Jackson raises here is, when this happens, does Mary now know something new apart from what she had known earlier? Does she come to know anything new after coming out of the room that she was confined to for any number of years? So does she gain any new knowledge when she sees things, underscore the word, for herself? Now, when she can see all these colors that she had been talking about, that she had been reading about, all the different kind of sort of visual experiences that she had been reading about in different books, now when she has a direct experience of all of them, does it add something new to her already existing canon of knowledge? Now, if you look at it intuitively, it seems to us, we would believe that, we would be more inclined to say that Mary would, in that case, come to know something new, something which she had hitherto not known. Namely, what is it like for for her to have certain kind of experiences? So now something earlier she was reading about, what is it for somebody to have certain colorful experiences? Now she knows what it actually means to have those kind of visual experiences. So it's not a kind of a general equation anymore. So now she herself directly is able to see that, and we would be inclined to say that this new this experience that she now has would add something new to her previous account of knowledge, to her already existing canon of knowledge. Now, that being the case, the problem that arises here is that we have already assumed, we are already making this assumption here, that whatever physical account, whatever scientific account, whatever physicalistic explanation of seeing of color could be had, she already has it. She already knows the complete physical account of things. So therefore, if we believe that she has now come to know something new, that means this is something not physical in nature, because she already has knowledge of whatever could be accounted for through physicalism. Since that is already known, so therefore something new that she now knows cannot be physical. So it has to be something non-physical by definition. Oh, and if that is the case, then the problem is that physicalist account of these kind of phenomenal experiences is not complete, because Mary now knows something new about the world, something that she could never get from having from having a complete descriptive physical account of colorful experiences. So the point here is that therefore what we call a subjective experience, first person experience of say for example colors or anything for that matter, so these phenomenal experiences are over and apart from what we could ever know from the physical description of things. And that being the case, that means even when we have a complete physical account of things, there is some residue still left, some kind of a non-physical residue, which even after having a complete physicalist account of phenomenal experiences is kind of left over. And so far as this leftover remains with us, it would always be a challenge for physicalism, because physicalism is basically physicalism rests on the assumption that there could be a complete physical account of how mind functions. There could be a complete physical description of explanation of mental states, which also means phenomenal experiences that form, so to speak, the content of those mental states, and so on and so forth. So if there are non-physical properties, then it's a problem. It's a problem for the physicalist. Now, to sort of understand again what the kind of problem that we face here, let me read a passage from Neil Campbell's book, A Brief History of Philosophy of Mind. So, about Mary's new experiences when she walks out into the world. Regarding that, Campbell says, what Mary learns must either be a physical fact or a non-physical fact. We have already said that Mary knew all the physical facts about color experiences before she saw colors for herself. If what it is like to see blue were just another in a long list of physical facts about color perception, then it is something Mary would have known already. Thus, if we agree with Frank Jackson that Mary learns a new fact, that what she learns must be a non-physical fact. If there are non-physical facts, it follows that physicalism is false. For physicalism denies that there are any such facts. The knowledge argument, this argument, Mary's room argument, is also called the knowledge argument. The knowledge argument then proves that color qualia, such as the felt blueness of sensations caused by the sky, are non-physical properties. If they weren't, then Mary would have known about them all along. So this is, broadly speaking, the argument that Frank Jackson puts forward through his thought experiment, on Mary's room. So, but now to sort of understand the difference between some of the earlier proposed arguments and, say, for example, Thomas Nagel's argument and this argument is that Thomas Nagel's main point is that more sort of like what he's presenting is more of a metaphysical problem, is more of so to speak epistemological problem. So the point there is that we don't have we don't know what it means for a bat to see the world that bat sees. So from that point of view, the point the same point in favor of qualia is made from a different angle, whereas in Mary's room argument, it's not only a problem that is important from the point of view of epistemology, but also from the point of view of the very methodology, very assumptions that we make when we are speaking from the point of view of physicalist or from the point of view of materialist. So one of the methodological assumptions in physicalism, I mean one of the sort of also not only methodological, one of the sort of assumptions in physicalist account is that we could completely explain away the realm of the mental through the physical explanation of things. So we don't require any other explanation apart from the physical explanation. So now Frank Jackson's argument, as a matter of fact, hits at that very idea. So like it's sort of it hits at a different point, at the physicalist. So, friends, we'll continue talking about the problem of qualia. We'll return after a short break. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. So we were talking about different problems, the different arguments that have been suggested, that have been proposed in favor of qualia, which is one of the main issues at stake for any kind of physicalist explanation, any kind of physicalist account of mental states. And there we saw how Frank Jackson's argument, called the knowledge argument or Mary's room argument, poses the problem from a different angle. So Thomas Nagel, tries to tackle the issue from a different perspective, and Frank Jackson's argument hits at a different point. At the physicalist account of things. Another argument which is somewhat similar that is proposed by Jackson is called Fred's color experience. So there he wants us to suppose that there is a person named Fred, and he sees two shades of red that no one else can differentiate. And to everybody else, those two shades look entirely different. So, say for example, for those of us who find this example a little too far-fetched. So, if we imagine, a kind of place where the colors that we see around ourselves are mostly, say for example, either white or black. So, say for example, somebody staying, in the polarly regions. So, the color that would be dominantly, seen by that person would be white. So now in those conditions, it's very, very likely that the person would be able to make a difference between even very, very minute differences between two different shades of white. For that matter, some community living in such kind of conditions may have two different names for two different shades of white, which would be practically tantamount to seeing two different shades of white as two different colors. So it's not, what is being proposed in this thought experiment is not something too far-fetched. It always remains a possibility. So certain specialists, are able to see differences among things which a non-specialist may not be aware of. So say for example, people in Ayurveda, most the physicians would want to check our pulse. Now, for an ordinary person or for a non-Ayurvedic doctor, wouldn't have the same kind of variety of experiences of different kind of pulses as probably a Ayurvedic doctor would have, or for that matter, for an ordinary person, seeing somebody pulse, sort of we wouldn't have that same kind of varied account of different kind of pulse rates and how to make diagnosis through pulses. So it's not something that's like too far-fetched or too imaginative. So this is what Jackson wants us, to imagine that there's some person red who can see two different shades of red, which are which I cannot see. I mean, I cannot make this difference. So when I see those two objects of different shades of red, I'm not able to sort of grasp the difference between the two. But Fred has that special vision through which he can make a difference between the two. So he can consistently discriminate the two different colors. He tells us that they look different to him, and so now suppose we know everything there is to know about Fred's brain, and how sort of his visual apparatus actually grasps these experiences. So even when we do that, this would not allow us to know what the other red looks like. So even if we have a complete sort of physical account of what different kind of neurons that he may have, and whatever, we would still not understand what is that other shade that he's being able to see, and we are not. So now, in addition to this, Frank Jackson wants us to believe that we all have operations or to make our brain and eyes work just like Fred. After the operation, we will see now the two different shades of red and know what the other shade looks like. So we will, in this case, know something new that we hitherto didn't know before the operation, even though before that we knew everything else there was to know about Fred's brain. So this is yet another example. It's a kind of a different version of Mary's room argument. It's just that sort of now we are placing ourselves in place of Mary. So we would in this case, after we have this sort of like new apparatus which we didn't have earlier, if we have the same kind of apparatus now placed in us, so now we would have this new experience. So like I'm saying, for example, if we were to sort of imagine something similar in the case of Bat's argument, then the idea would be, suppose we have now this additional paraphernalia, physical paraphernalia that is required to have Bat's vision. We would certainly know something new, which sort of a descriptive account of Bat's vision would have never provided to us. But as I said earlier, what is it like to be a bat? That argument is directed in a different direction, and Frank Jackson's argument is directed in a different direction. So had Thomas Nagel wanted us to believe that sort of suppose we now have that paraphernalia, and wouldn't we know something new, then his sort of his argument would have sort of would have preempted Jackson's argument. So Jackson's conclusion basically here is that one can have all the physical information without thereby having all the information there is to have. So without, that is, knowing what it feels like to have a given experience. So therefore, physicalism, which says that everything can be explained in terms of physical explanations, but these two arguments demonstrate that we can know all the physical, so we can have a complete physical account of certain kind of experiences, but thereby we we don't know everything there is to know. So the existence of qualia proves that physicalism must be false. If qualia remains as a possibility, remains as a robust possibility, which as suggested by these thought experiments, then physicalism has to be false. So yet another argument that we can take into consideration, though in most of the philosophy textbooks, this argument is considered only from the point of view of refutation of or argument against functionalism. This is called inverted qualia argument, though sort of it's formulated differently, by Shoemaker and Ned Block. The first formulation of it, or the first proposal, or first suggestion of it, comes from Locke in his essay concerning human understanding. And let me read a passage from Locke's book, Essay Concerning Human Understanding. He says, neither would it carry any imputation of falsehood to our simple ideas if by the different structure of our organs it were so ordered that the same object should produce in several men's minds different ideas at the same time. If the idea, say for example, that a violet produced in one man's mind by his eyes were the same that a marigold produces in another man's eyes, and vice versa. For since this could never be known because one man's mind could not pass into another man's body, to perceive what appearances were produced by those organs, neither the ideas hereby nor the names would be at all confounded, or any falsehood be in either. For all things that had the texture of a violet, producing constantly the idea which he called blue, and those which had the texture of a marigold, producing constantly the idea which he as constantly called yellow, whatever those appearances were in his mind, he would be able as regularly to distinguish things for his use by those appearances, and understand and signify those distinctions marked by the names blue and yellow, as if the appearances or ideas in his mind received from those two flowers were exactly the same with the ideas in other men's mind. So basically, sort of the new proposal that comes from sort of the new version of it that we find in Ned Block is that there could be somebody who sees who is not only able to make difference between, say for example, red and green, like color blind people sort of fail to make. But also, in addition, suppose there is somebody who sees red as green and green as red, and there is now an evidence that it's a disease, though very rare. There are people who have this anomaly. So that being the case, now this person, such people would constantly see something and call it as something else. So sort of they would use the term green for different kind of visual experiences that they would make. But from the point of view of their behavior, how sort of things function for them, it would make no difference. So because green in the world is still known by that color, even though they see it as red, but since they call it green, therefore it wouldn't practically make any difference, because each time this person actually seeing red as green is going to call it red. So for all practical purposes in the language community, this distinction of first-hand experience of what kind of first-hand experience this person has, which is different from ours, that would never come to the fore. So now this argument, as we would see, is yet another take on the issue, and now we may like to see what is the main distinction between the two earlier stated argument and this argument, which was first formulated by Locke, of course in a different context, because for Locke an object has certain primary qualities and certain secondary qualities. Primary qualities reside in the object, so they have a completely objective nature, whereas secondary qualities depend upon, even though sort of they have sort of their source in the objective world, but they actually depend. They are relative to the subject who experiences those qualities. So he thinks of this argument from the point of view of making distinction between primary and secondary qualities. But the point here is that in the argument offered by Thomas Nagel, the nature of problem proposed is more concerned with metaphysics and epistemology. Frank Jackson sort of makes a different kind of a point, which makes a dent into the physicalist account of things at a very different point. So his sort of the issue that he puts at stake is that is there ever a possibility, if we hit upon a complete physical description, wouldn't it be the case that some residue would still be left over? And if that is the case, and if we have compelling argument, if we have compelling argument to prove that there would be some residue always remaining, then physicalism is wrong. Here, the argument basically sort of is made from the point of view of nameability, because our experiences become in a certain way, because it's not that like for subjective experiences we don't have any words, we don't describe them, we never talk about that. So say for example, in Buddhist philosophy, qualia would be something else, completely something else, which is completely devoid of even any linguistic expressions. So forget about the descriptions of it. For them, if their idea of salakshana were to be viewed as some kind of account of qualia, were to be seen as synonymous with qualia, their idea would be that you cannot even have any name for that, because they are completely unique in nature. So, but the point here is that we do talk about these experiences. We do talk about our experiences of green, our experiences of blue. There is some communication going around some of these phenomenal experiences that we have, painfulness of something, and so on and so forth. We do talk about our pains. So now the problem here is that there could be when we are when we hear somebody say that person is seeing blue, we don't know what his blue is. In order to ensure that his use of the word blue is correct, a similar kind of argument is made by Wittgenstein when he talks about beetle in the box experiment. So sensations, physical sensations, like sensations as felt by us, their account is somewhat like a beetle in the box. So everybody has that, but only you can see it. So for the third person, it's impossible to understand what is, say for example, what is it for you to feel pain. I know what is it for me to feel pain, but I don't know, say for example, what is your seeing of blue, what is the meaning of blueness for you. Your use of the term does not ensure anything for me to have an account of your seeing of blue. So the inverted qualia argument makes a dent into the physicalist account of mental states from mainly, of course, it raises other issues as well. So issues concerning with language also have important implications for theory of knowledge. But the main point here is that linguistic description, or for that matter, the use of certain names for certain sensations, tells us nothing about whether the other person's blueness is same as my blueness when I use the term blue. So whether his experience of blue is same as mine, because we use what is common between the two of us is naming of it as by a certain term. So, like, I mean, even if there was some slight difference, even if there was some kind of a possibility, to see that there's some slight difference, the point here is that it would never be, from purely linguistic point of view, it would never be known to us. So, inverted qualia argument, tries to approach, present a critique of the problem from critique of the issue from a different point of view. Now going back to Frank Jackson's argument in Mary's room, what is called the knowledge argument. So there, what he's proposing is, like it might seem to us, as I said earlier, that maybe they are skeptic about the physicalist project, and therefore materialism now should not be entertained anymore as a possibility. But to sort of Frank Jackson in his later on in his paper points out that Mary's room argument only suggests to us that physicalist account may not go far enough in trying to give us a complete explanation of phenomenal experiences, like seeing of blue, like seeing of red, and painfulness of pain. But he says that doesn't mean the end of materialism. He says materialism and physicalism are two different takes on the issue. Because materialism is a metaphysical claim that which basically which basically states that only fundamental substance is that the only fundamental substance is matter, and materialism would in that case involve a rejection of dualism. So basically the claim here is that only material is, and there is nothing else. There is no other realm. As in Descartes, we want to imagine a different kind of a realm, namely the realm of mind, a mental realm. So the claim being made by materialism is a metaphysical claim that only material exists and nothing else does. And if we may imagine, if we want to, if we imagine something extra physical, extra material, so sort of like sooner or later we would come to have a material account of that. Physicalism, whereas, is a different kind of claim, which involves the materialist claim that only fundamental substance is matter, but in addition another claim that everything can in principle be explained by the laws of physics. So that is an additional claim being made here. So the difference between the two is, in physicalism, we are working with a completely, kind of a mechanistic view of the world that, came into the picture after Enlightenment. So, the earlier pre-Enlightenment religious kind of, notion of the world, which had, of course, several extra, extra material kind of entities like souls, ghosts, devils, angels, and so on and so forth. Soul, for that matter, most importantly, which we almost think as synonymous with the self. So, now after having rejected all that, the mechanistic view involved the idea that not only that only material exists and no other thing, no other kind of qualities exist apart from that, but also this idea that everything in the universe could be explained by the laws of physics, by in a kind of there could be a complete mechanical picture of how a universe runs. So this universe could be thought of as a machine, and we could have a complete account of that. So now, according to Frank Jackson, his arguments only suggest that physicalism is wrong so far as we have reasons to believe that qualia would always remain as a residue even after we have a complete physical account of things. But it does not present a cul-de-sac kind of a situation for materialism. Materialism still has, possibility to, sort of stay alive and kicking, because for him, we could head our sort of thinking in another direction. That maybe that everything arises out of material, and in that process, what we call phenomenal reality, phenomenal properties, phenomenal experiences, mental experiences, could be one of the offshoots of this, kind of a physical evolution. So, say for example, even if we look at Darwin's picture of sort of how evolution happens, so there, sort of our mental reflexes, sort of our reflexive ways of thinking, forming ideas. That's a part of evolution. That's an offshoot. That's an offshoot of the sort of a physical evolution that we have. So this idea is called is named as Epiphenomenalism. So it's namely the idea that what we call as mental or extra material is something of an offshoot of material, which in turn does not have any bearance upon the material as such. Now, to present, to give a definition of what epiphenomenalism means, epiphenomenalism is supposed to be the idea that qualia are causally impotent with respect to the physical world. That is, the view that even though qualia exist and are caused by events in the physical world, qualia do not themselves cause changes in the physical world. According to Oxford English Dictionary, the meaning of epiphenomenon is a phenomenon that occurs with and seems to result from another, but has no reciprocal effect or subsequent influence. A causally inert byproduct, and which is generally applied to consciousness, regarded as a byproduct of the material activities of the brain and nervous system. So, friends, we discussed today, the different arguments, some more arguments in favor of qualia. Though there are some interesting account, even from the point of view neurology. Famous neurologist Ramachandran suggests that qualia, is not only a problem about phenomenal experiences, but has its bearing on the idea of self and also on the idea of a perception, because qualia, couldn't be something that's floating around for anybody to see. Qualia makes sense only so far as we, also side by side, suppose that there is a self having those experiences. So he makes, he sort of points towards the broader implications of what qualia is, and he says that unlike several other neurologists who believe that first we should try to tackle the problem that qualia presents itself before us, Ramachandran suggests that we'll have to sort of take all these issues together, and of course there are sort of very important discussions around it in Charvaka philosophy and in Shankara's philosophy and in Sankhya philosophy. Some kind of epiphenomenalism is suggested in some of these classical sort of thought systems, classical Indian thought systems, but we'll sort of keep that for a separate discussion. So for today, that's it for now. Thank you.
Dear friends, due to paucity of time, we have to stop our lecture here. We hope that with this lecture you were able to understand the problem of qualia. On that note, we would like to thank Dr. Verma for coming here and delivering this wonderful lecture. And thank you, dear friends, for watching our lecture. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.